Zombie apocalypse.
How's it going, everybody? This is Tyler Drabo. Hope you're having another great day, and welcome back to another video. So this video I had initially planned to release in mid-April during Ramadan. However, I have had to push it back several times because of multiple crazy things that have been happening to me. But now I've decided that I'm finally going to go ahead and talk about it for this video. For this one, I'm going to be talking about everything that happened to me during Ramadan of 2021 and how it went for me overall and what I learned from it altogether. Now, this Ramadan was completely different unlike past few years because during this Ramadan, I also had to go through coronavirus pandemic as well, along with having to work with 3 jobs as a whole. And because of that, there was a lot of stress that was put on me during this Ramadan. And this was a Ramadan as a result that ended up proving to be one of the craziest I've ever had to endure. So before we get into it, I'm going to be talking to you about what Ramadan is for those that don't know what it is about. I'm going to be talking about what I did during this time, what I went through, and more importantly, the things that I took away from this Ramadan that I can take into next year when I do Ramadan again in 2022, as well as in life in general as a whole. So for those of you that don't know, Ramadan is a month-long holiday that is celebrated by those in the Islamic religion, and it usually takes place once a year, and it usually can take place during any time of the year, whether it's during the spring, summer, fall, or winter. And usually during that month, we would go 4 whole weeks without eating throughout the day, at least until the evening, and usually this would take place around during the early morning hours, usually around 4 or 5 a.m., and usually it would go all the way till 7 or 8 p.m. at night before we finally do get the chance to eat. Now usually this would be sometime during the summer or in the fall in which we would most likely do that, but it can usually vary during the season. Usually during the winter, it usually is much shorter. Sometimes you actually have to eat a lot later before you end up doing your fast, and then usually you get to eat a lot earlier once the fast ends, usually sometime around like 6 or 7 p.m. or something like that. So usually if it was in the winter, it would probably be a lot easier to be able to do a fast. However, otherwise during the summer is usually the most brutal because usually those are when it is the longest, and those are usually when you would have to spend the longest amount of hours possible fasting before you can finally eat, which can usually sometimes be around like sometime nearly like middle of 8 o'clock or something like that. Usually it would be much later in the day during the summer, so it's very tough doing it during Ramadan, but you know, it's something that I've been doing for a few years now, and obviously, you know, I've pretty much gotten used to it at this point. So we usually do it for about a whole month, and at the very end we would have a celebration called Eid, in which we would celebrate everything that we accomplished during Ramadan, particularly going through the entire month without eating a whole lot, and more importantly just celebrate life altogether. And usually this would end up being a celebration in which we would see family and friends, we would go to the mosque and pray a little bit, and usually sometimes, like in my occasion, we would usually go out to like a local diner or maybe an IHOP and usually have some breakfast and all that. And then after that, we would also get some gifts as well. So usually it would vary for me between clothes or video games or toys or maybe something extracurricular in general. So usually Eid happens at the end of every Ramadan, but we actually have 2 of these per year. We usually would have another one later in the year as well. So usually our version of Christmas is Eid, and usually we don't celebrate that until the very end of Ramadan. But that's usually if we do everything right during Ramadan and we do what we have to do to make sure we get through the end of the month without any real serious issue. Now, as I've mentioned before, this Ramadan was particularly crazy for me because during this time I had to go through the coronavirus pandemic, which was actually the 2nd year in a row I actually had to do a Ramadan in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic. Obviously last year it was a lot easier for me to do that because I only had 1 part-time job during that time, and obviously having to spend all my days at home, having to take all my classes online, obviously it was still pretty hard because obviously I had to have a fridge right next to me because I was living in my own room, and so I was just sometimes during the day look at that fridge and I would just really want to go in there and get something to eat and break my fast, and it would just be brutal to that, especially during the hours of April or May and all of that stuff. But last year it was a little easier because I only had 1 part-time job. This year I had to go through 3 jobs while I was working with the COVID pandemic, and obviously that as a result proved to be a lot more difficult than you think it would. And let me tell you why. A lot of it had to do with the amount of stress that I had to endure. And with that in particular, obviously, as you all know, I went through a big weight loss during that time. I've mentioned that multiple times in the past as well. And so mainly my job was to try to maintain the weight that I did while I was going through these 3 jobs. And doing my Ramadans in general. Now, one of those jobs obviously is an overnight job, and during that overnight job we would have a 1 hour break, and so that would be that time in which I would be able to eat something before I would get back to work. And then obviously once I get out of work, I was have to begin my fast obviously, and at the same time I have to go through my other two jobs as well, and having to do that for 4 weeks in general, obviously it was a bit of a pain, and it also produced a lot of stress as well because I also lost quite a bit of sleep during that time. Having to work overnight at Walmart while also going through those 2 day jobs at ShopRite and Lowe's and having to fast as well, that proved to be a very, very stressful experience as well because, I had to lose a lot of sleep during that time. There were times where I was only able to get like 2 or 3 hours of sleep as a whole during the day before I was able to go to my next job, and that proved to be very difficult because I ended up being like drowsy as a result. I was struggling to try to stay awake, and more importantly, because of all of those hours I had to do, it made it hard for me to be able to find something to eat once I was able to break my fast and all of that stuff. And as a result, we always have those unexpected weight losses that comes with those expected weight losses when you're trying to lose all that weight that you had gained during that time. Believe it or not, that's exactly what I went through. As you all know, I was around 150, 145 pounds before Ramadan began, and because of those 3 jobs that I had to go through, I actually ended up losing an extra 5 to 10 pounds as a result of that. And so, like I mentioned, that's one thing I tried to avoid, obviously. I didn't want to lose too much weight. Unfortunately, that was exactly what happened during Ramadan. So, having to go through those 3 jobs and end up having to go through that, it was really stressful. But I will tell you, thank God it is over because, I obviously do not have to go through something like that again for a very long time. Hopefully never again as a whole, because, going through 3 jobs during Ramadan and not having a whole lot of sleep in general, I have learned that can be pretty bad for you, and it almost ended very badly for me. So when I look back on this as a whole, the 3 main things that I think I would take away from this, it would pretty much go a little something like this. The first main takeaway that I took from Ramadan this year is that never do multiple jobs while you're doing Ramadan. Obviously, having 1 job during Ramadan is good enough, and that's something that I probably should have found out when I began Ramadan this year. Having a day job, an evening job, and an overnight job at the same time, all while doing Ramadan, and having very little free time whatsoever, and having to lose so much sleep as a result, that made this Ramadan a whole lot harder. And obviously, that's just something that, you probably should have really thought twice about before doing. And unfortunately, I didn't because, like I said before, CVS, I was having to lose a lot of hours because I was never able to get all the hours that I really wanted there. So I had to get a full-time job, and well, this was the end result. I ended up having to be put in this situation as a result. So next Ramadan, obviously, like I said, I'm still trying to find that full-time media job. I'm still looking for that. And so obviously, the main thing for next year is to try to cut back. Hopefully just have 1 main full-time job, hopefully in the media industry, so that way I don't have to go through another Ramadan as crazy as this one again. The second main thing that I took away from this, and this was mostly a positive, is that I was still able to get through Ramadan quite well though. And that was mainly because, like I said before, I've done this multiple times. I've done this since 2008, obviously, and every single year, because of how much use I've gotten to this, I've obviously gotten a lot better at being able to maintain my hunger. And that's really the second takeaway that I take from this, is that I'm still good at maintaining my hunger when I have to. Even during those times, though, obviously, where I had that unexpected weight loss, unfortunately, I was still able to maintain my hunger because, during those times, like I said, I had a fridge in my room, and at the same time I was working 3 jobs, and 2 of those jobs, they mainly had to do around groceries as well. I was looking at all of that food, and I just really, during those times, just wanted to grab something and eat. It just proved to be a very hard thing to do. But with all of that experience that I've got from all the past Ramadans I did, obviously I was able to get that experience so that way I can know that I need to hold off on that food until the time was right for me to break my fast, usually during the allotted time that I'm supposed to break it. Having that experience, I know that even though I want something that badly and I really want to get it, I need to know that it's not time yet. You need to hold off on it, and you need to wait just a little bit longer before you're able to go ahead and get whatever you want to eat. And so obviously that's one takeaway that I'm at least proud of, obviously, is that I am still good at maintaining my hunger when I have to. Finally, the third and most important takeaway that I took from Ramadan this year, obviously, is that it made me more aware of what was happening around me. It made me a lot more aware of the world around me. And I say that because obviously this was the second Ramadan in a row in which I had to do it in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic. And obviously the coronavirus pandemic has caused quite a bit of suffering for a lot of people as well. Obviously a lot of people have lost families as a result of the virus. And also, it was just very hard being able to not get out of the house a whole lot and end up being stuck near your kitchen. And because of that, obviously it made it a lot harder to be able to go through Ramadan during the pandemic. Plus, with all the other crazy things that have been happening in the world as well, some positive, some negative as well, obviously, it makes us a lot more aware that we are sharing that same suffering that everybody else is as well. And so that's something that obviously I end up taking away from this as well, because, in past Ramadans, I was mainly just more focused on what I was able to do, what I could do during this Ramadans to see what kind of person I became. This year, it was a lot different because obviously with this pandemic and all the world affairs that have been happening, this pandemic, along with this Ramadan, made me feel a lot more about what was happening around me, a lot more about what everybody else was feeling, and more importantly, just how everything in the world was really affecting me as a whole during this Ramadan. I shared that same suffering with everybody else, and so obviously that is something that I definitely feel like I really took a lot more of this time around than I did during past Ramadans. And that's an experience that I definitely feel like that I can take away very well. Plus the fact that I had to have 3 jobs during this Ramadan and not having a whole lot of sleep, it made me feel that same suffering that everybody else did as well. Obviously, like I said, this was a crazy Ramadan that I had to go through. And with everything that I went through, obviously I'm hoping not to go through something like it again, but again, this was still a very valuable experience because obviously I had to learn that, I had to cut back the amount of jobs that I had to hopefully just one full-time job. I had to make sure that, I'm not losing control of my hunger. And more importantly, now that I know exactly a lot more about what's happening around me, I'm aware of how this Ramadan in particular, all the hours of fasting that I go through can relate to all the suffering that everybody else is going through as well. And so obviously this was a really crazy experience for me, and it's really also pretty fun as well because this Eid took place on my college commencement, and obviously that was really special as well. And so obviously I got to celebrate my college commencement on Eid, and obviously that is one of the greatest experiences of my life. I was proud that I got to celebrate it in person with my dad and a whole bunch of friends as well. And so obviously at the end of what was a really tough Ramadan, it was nice to get to celebrate it with my dad in very fun fashion. And yeah, it was just a very fun Eid. And after a Ramadan that I went through, I'm just very happy that I got to have that day because hey, you have a college commencement and Eid on the very same day. It's the best of both worlds for me, and that's something that I'm just very happy for. So yeah, it was a pretty crazy Ramadan. Obviously, I wasn't alone. There were a whole bunch of other Muslims in the world like me that went through it as well. And so to everybody that was able to get through Ramadan, I salute you. I'm proud to stand with you. And yeah, here's to hoping that next Ramadan in 2022 is a lot better than this year because it was a very crazy Ramadan this year. And yeah, hopefully, we don't have to go through something like this again in the near future. Alright, that's gonna do it for this video. Hope you all enjoyed it. As always, if you'd like to see more of my content, be sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell so you know when my latest video is released. As always, be sure to comment below for future suggestions for all my videos, whether it's vlogs, projects, or challenges, you name it. Be sure to leave it in the comments below and I'll do my best to make them. And as always, follow me in my social media. All the links are in the description below. That's gonna do it for this video. Hope you're having another great day. As always, I hope to see all of you again in another video very soon. So long, everybody.